614 Startups Nation, welcome back to another episode of the 614 Startups Podcast. My name is Elio Harmon, your host, and I'm back in my very favorite seat. We are the number one startup podcast in the city, and that's because I've earned your trust over these many years by bringing you the very best guests. I'm back again doing what I do with my very special guest tonight, Dan Manges of RWX. Dan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Elio. I'm excited to be here.
All right, great to have you, man. For people who don't know your name, this is their first time getting exposure to you. Your name is tied to a very, very big name here in Columbus, but we'll get to that at some point. I want to start by asking you a question I love to start every conversation with is, how did you get your start in technology entrepreneurship?
I always wanted to be a software engineer. I spent a lot of time on computers when I was a kid, and I was always interested in business too. When I was 10, I had America Online, dial-up internet, and you had AOL Instant Messenger, and you had to pick your screen name. And I made mine Daniel Inc., like Daniel Incorporated. I was a pretty nerdy kid, but was interested in software engineering and interested in business. I didn't dive into startups right out of college. I spent a couple years working in the enterprise at JPMorgan Chase and a couple years doing consulting. But after a couple of those early experiences, I had an opportunity to join a startup and haven't ever looked back. I've been working on startups ever since.
All right, we're going to do some name dropping with startups, but we'll get back to that in 1 second. Anybody who remembers America Online and like that sound, right? When you're getting online is a person after my own heart. That's how I grew up. I was in those chat rooms acting up, all right? I didn't know how to act when I got on the internet. It was off the hook back in the 90s. But what was that first startup that you joined?
The first one that I joined was Braintree, a payment startup based in Chicago. We help businesses accept credit card payments online and in their mobile apps. At the time I was there, Uber was Braintree's most notable customer. So every time, I'm sure almost everybody listening is taking an Uber. Every time you get out of the car and it charges your credit card, it was Braintree's payment software processing that credit card transaction. So I spent 5 years building that business up until its acquisition by PayPal in 2013.
Not a bad way to start your career in startups right out of the gate, working for a company that gets acquired. But the company I'm most familiar, the one that I associate you with the most is Root Insurance. And you were part of that founding team. So was it after Braintree that you joined Root, or am I skipping too far in your entrepreneurial story?
There's a little bit you're skipping over there, but nothing notable. After Braintree, I took some time to really think about what I wanted to do next. And I helped some friends launch their startups, did a little bit of consulting, worked on a couple ideas of my own that didn't really go anywhere, nothing too serious, but ultimately didn't have something that captivated my interest that I felt like I could go into and say, I want to commit years of my life to pursuing this, regardless of the outcome. And that was until the opportunity with Root came about in 2015.
Okay, so Root is a legendary company at this point. It's gone through many iterations, or many phases, not iterations. But what were the early days like? And walk me through what it takes to go from a startup to a company that goes public.
Yeah, it was extraordinarily fast that we made that journey. And I mentioned we started the company in 2015, and Root went public in 2020, which is an extraordinarily short timeline, which means we had really rapid growth, and it's challenging to build a business that quickly. You don't have the opportunity for things to stabilize or wait to figure it out before you're trying to tackle the next challenge. But in the early days, we had a really small team, but an exceptional density of talent, including my co-founder and Root's still current CEO, Alex Tim, who's extraordinarily brilliant, had a background in insurance and is an actuary, but also an exceptionally talented product leader and thinker. And I thoroughly loved working alongside him to build the business along with the other early team members. It is difficult. It was really kind of daunting to try to build an insurance company from scratch. And actually, at first, we didn't think we'd go straight towards that. We thought maybe we'd build some technology around driving behavior, maybe partner with some insurance carriers. There was always kind of an insurance angle to it, but we didn't necessarily at the onset start out to become a carrier ourselves. But eventually we realized to have the kind of impact we wanted to have and to be able to create the kind of experience for consumers that we wanted to be able to create, that we were just going to have to become a carrier. So we ended up going through what at the time felt like a very lengthy regulatory process with the Ohio Department of Insurance to become an actual insurance carrier. And our engineering team had to build the entirety of the software necessary to power an insurance company, which was a big undertaking with just a few people. But I think it's a great testament to what you can accomplish with a small core of exceptionally talented people.
Yeah, so exceptional talent early on, probably one of the main, well, finding the right problem to solve, right? Like, so you had to iterate and change and get to where you were going by becoming an insurer yourself, and then having the talent. Probably all of that contributed to scaling. I know we're here to talk about RWX, but I wouldn't be able to forgive myself now that I finally have you on the show to not talk about some of these things because they're very interesting. After you left Root, and some of the memorable things I remember about Root Insurance when you were still there is that you guys invited the community. It was my introduction to Bren's Pizza. If you guys have never had Bren's Pizza, it's a legendary pizza shop here in Columbus. And I also remember when you guys did the partnership with the NASCAR driver, right? This was when Root was just to the moon. And then you guys go public, you leave, and the company struggles a little bit. What was that like, watching the company that you helped scale go through some public growing pains?
I think the growing pains are really interesting because, sure, in a certain sense, Root struggled, but I think from another perspective, it really didn't. It the company has stayed on its mission of trying to provide more fair insurance for consumers, trying to provide the best user experience around insurance products and services for consumers. And that's always been true. And I think if you look at the company through a certain lens, you feel the steady incremental progress of improvement along that path of better products for consumers, better insurance fundamentals and economics, loss ratios improving quarter after quarter, marketing expenses becoming more efficient like quarter after quarter. So there is this way of looking at the business that probably few from outside of it can really see, where I feel like it's been on this steady trajectory of constant improvement throughout that time, including going public and on the other side of it. But usually when people ask about the struggles, what they're looking at sometimes is the stock price. And I think for me, that was a really eye-opening and fascinating experience of taking a company public, because you realize sometimes how separated the stock price is from the things that you're doing as a company. And honestly, even being on the executive management team, where I knew what the financials were ahead of every earnings report, I still could not for the life of me have told you what the stock price was going to do when we released earnings. Maybe, if it was extreme in one direction or the other, I could have, but you realize kind of how uncorrelated those things are, the fundamentals of the company and the product and the services providing from consumers, and what the stock price is actually trading at. But I think to be honest about some of the struggles, building an insurance carrier is an extraordinarily capital intensive business. You need a tremendous amount of capital to be able to enter this market. Personal auto insurance in the US alone is $250 billion a year. Like, that's the total amount that all consumers spend on car insurance across all carriers. It is a big market. And that's what made it such a compelling and exciting opportunity for us, and why we wanted to build the company to try to make an impact in that space, because it is this product that affects almost every consumer. And in so much as it was a capital intensive business, the capital needs of the company were really great, which meant we did have to be mindful of what investors were willing to allocate capital towards, and how we could have not just a business that built a great product for consumers, but one that was an attractive opportunity for investors. And the market went through a lot of changes over the past couple of years. And I think a lot of what you see in the markets is a reflection, not of Root directly even, but of the markets as a whole, those sentiments changing, of the way that investors are evaluating opportunities changing. And we had the whole period of the zero interest rate phenomenon of really cheap capital that kind of changed how investors looked at opportunities. And it was a period of adjustment, I think, for a lot of companies in the market, including Root. And I think Alex and the team navigated that extraordinarily well and pulled out of it a little bit now. And again, it's a big balancing act, trying to keep the company aligned with what makes a great investable business. But the good news is they've been smart about managing the capital they've had. They've always had like an extraordinarily strong balance sheet. So I'm really optimistic and excited to see where the company continues to go in the future.
Yeah, and even with all that, Alex still he looks young, right? So he was able to weather the storm and come out looking and smelling like roses. All right, so you're on to a new company, and that's where I want to spend the rest of the time. So what is RWX? What problem are you solving, and who are you solving that problem for?
Yeah, so as I share, my background is in software engineering. I've written a lot of code in my career, and it's the thing I know best. I've learned a lot about payments, I've learned a lot about insurance, but as I thought about what I wanted to spend the next chunk of my life doing, I didn't really see myself pursuing other opportunities in that space. But the thing that I know extraordinarily well is building software. And in my past experiences of building those high growth startups, ran into a host of challenges as we went from being a really small team to a really large engineering organization. I think Root was over 250 people in engineering around the time when I left, and felt some diminishing returns on productivity as the team got bigger, and really looked for ways to try to maintain the level of productivity that always felt like we had when we were small. And some of that's inherent and unavoidable, and there's not that much you could do. But I felt like there was an opportunity to do it better. I talked to a lot of engineering leaders at other companies in similar situations that had similar problems and not great answers to them. And I really wanted to try to start a company to solve those problems. So that's what we did. One of the most critical parts of an engineer's productivity is the feedback loop that they have when they make code changes. So for the non-engineers listening, there's a tool that engineers use called continuous integration. They often abbreviate it CI. And CI is responsible for all the automation that runs every single time an engineer makes changes to code. So almost every engineering team will have a set of scripts, a set of automated tests, of checks, code that they've written to check the code and make sure it's all working correctly. And you could imagine as something that runs every time an engineer is trying to make changes, making that process fast, making it reliable, making it cost effective is a really important thing for engineering teams. And as my co-founder, Tommy Graves, and I looked at it, we felt like existing solutions in that space were inadequate given the degree of importance and the magnitude of impact that it has for software engineers. And we wanted to build new tools to solve some of those problems.
This episode is brought to you by Rev1. Rev1's mission is to help entrepreneurs build great companies. As you navigate the waters of business entrepreneurship, you don't have to go it alone. A strategic partnership with Rev1 connects innovators to the talent, customers, space, and funding you need when you need it. Get started with Rev1 Startup Studio by visiting rev1ventures.com to learn more. Again, the website is rev1ventures.com. Support for the 614 Startups podcast comes from Nationwide. Nationwide's mission is to protect people, businesses, and futures with extraordinary care. To help fulfill that mission, Nationwide is looking to invest its $350 million venture capital investment fund in insurtechs that will help them create new and exciting products and solutions to meet the needs of their customers. If you're interested in partnering with Nationwide's venture capital team, visit nationwideventures.com to learn more. Again, the website is nationwideventures.com. Nationwide is on your side.
Yeah, so talk about sexy, right? Solving problems for engineers. How do we make this thing sexy, right? Let's talk about, are we saving time? Are we saving money? Are you improving customer experience, engineer experience? Why does this matter so much for the companies and for the engineers themselves?
Yeah, all of the above
Mm-hmm.
on the benefits. And honestly, somewhat admittedly, we've struggled to nail down our elevator pitch because there's so many different facets of Mint, the CI product that we've built, that we feel like can help engineering teams, that it's hard to distill it down into like a short soundbite. But overall, we focus on improving performance, reliability, and overall developer experience while reducing costs, which, especially in the current economic climate, has been of interest for a lot of organizations. But I think the piece that is near and dear to me here is the developer experience. Because engineers know how satisfying it is to have a productive feedback loop, to have an effective way to be able to, hit some keys on their keyboard and make some code changes and get validation about whether or not those changes worked. And speeding that up provides for a much better developer experience as people are spending all day writing code. And I'm really excited by the capabilities that we've built into Mint to do that. This is a saturating competitive space. CI tools are one product that every engineering team buys. I talk to a lot of engineering teams that have homegrown solutions for various bits of their technology, but not in CI. Like in CI, this is like one vendor that every engineering team has, or a product that they will choose to use for this. But most of the existing solutions were built a long time ago, and a lot has changed. I think best practices have shifted. Like we've learned more about how to build software and like ways to standardize this. So we had the advantage of looking at what all the other players were doing and creating something from the ground up that addressed many of the common pitfalls and frustrations that engineers had with these tools. But it was a large undertaking, which I think is the biggest reason there hadn't really been a lot of new entrants in this space. It took our engineering team a long time to build this product before we could really enter the market. Maybe much like Root. It wasn't the type of thing where a couple engineers could just hack on something for a couple of months and like go and ship it. It required a lot to build up front to be able to do this.
Okay, so I'm a non-engineer. I assume quite a few people, even the founders that are going to listen to this, are not going to be engineers, but they're going to need to buy products to help their engineers. So let me try to see if I can understand it a little bit better. You mentioned the term feedback. Why is feedback important when writing code? Because it feels very much like without that feedback, they're kind of just writing blindly. Why is feedback so important?
Yeah, you correctly identified that. I mean, this is the main mechanism that engineers have for making sure they don't break things. And it used to be like a long time ago, what you had big QA teams. And QA teams still can play a really important role in the quality of software overall, but it used to be engineers would write some code, and then you'd have a separate entirely group of people that would like test that code, try to make sure it's working and everything. Well, that results in like a really slow process of getting changes like out to your end users. Engineers would characterize it as getting code out to production, but really what you're talking about is getting product releases in the hands of your customers. And especially with web software and mobile apps where you can release very frequently. If you go back, people used to ship releases on CDs, and you had to physically distribute them, and you were only going to release like once a year when you were doing that. So that process made sense. But in the age of web apps and mobile apps where you can ship as fast as you want to, I think a lot of people have discovered that they want to be able to ship in real time. They want to minimize the time between an engineer implementing a feature and that feature being able to be in customers' hands. And the only way to be that quick and that productive with it is to have a really great set of automated tests and checks that run on top of those code changes. Because you can't, if you're releasing on a daily basis, you can't, or even an hourly basis. Some teams do continuous deployment where they release on every single change. And, when you're doing that, you can't rely on entirely manual testing. You have to have a lot of automation, and the performance of that automation, again, the cost, the reliability, become of paramount importance to being able to do that, being able to have continuous delivery and get your code in to production as quickly as you can.
Okay, so great. So feedback is important. Previously, you would need another team to kind of figure out what was wrong with the code, send it back to you. There was a little bit of back and forth before it even got, into the customer's hands. But now with tools like Mint by RWX, see how I branded it right there, you can actually deploy software to help you with this feedback loop. But what kind of feedback is Mint providing to the engineer? Give me some examples when I submit my code, what I can expect back.
Yeah, so the biggest thing are automated tests that run. So what engineers will do is they'll write tests for code to say, if a user clicks on this button, this thing should happen. If a user inputs these values, this should be the output. And you write code to make sure that the code that you're writing does what you think it's doing. And this is important when applications grow to be large, because you might make a change and maybe not realize like all the behavior in the application that's going to be affected by that code that you're changing, because you just have an extraordinarily large amount of code powering your application. So the big thing is running these automated tests. Now, RWX did not invent this. Mint isn't the first tool to run these automated tests, but what we are is one of the first tools that will do something that we call content-based caching. So a lot of times when an engineer is making a change, their change does only affect a subset of the total amount of software. But previously with all of these tools, every time that an engineer made a change, every single test was run, regardless of whether or not their change could have even affected those tests. Where with Mint, we call it content-based caching, where we actually look at the content of the source files. And if those source files haven't changed, the ones that are relevant for the task that's running, Mint will produce a cache it. It'll be like, oh, I don't need to run this. I've already run this test on this exact same source code, and I already know that this works. I know that your changes didn't affect it. I'm not going to run it again. I'm just going to produce a cache it, which is instantaneous. So instead of running tests and waiting several minutes, you get this instantaneous cache it. You're not paying for the compute to run tests unnecessarily. You're not making engineers wait for tests unnecessarily. And you're also not dealing with flakiness. Because sometimes, you go to run that test and there's kind of an issue in it. It's a little bit flaky. It's failing intermittently. And now an engineer has to deal with this failure that really doesn't have anything to do with their code changes at all. So this is just a subset of the types of problems that we've solved with Mint. But it's why we're so passionate about it. And it's why we're so excited about the impact that we've been able to make for engineering teams using it so far.
Yeah. So how many teams do you have out there that are on Mint?
We're not disclosing the number of customers that we have, and we are still, admittedly, pretty early in building this. But the teams that we do have using it, we've gotten extraordinarily great positive feedback from them. The kind of testimonials that as a founder, it just really warms your heart to hear that, it's the only CI tool anybody would ever want to use. They're so glad to be off their previous products. They'd never want to go back. A lot of delight in the user experience at various points where people are just blown away by how quick and how easy some things are to achieve. And it's really satisfying to hear that because our team has put a lot of effort into, honestly, building the technology has been hard, but in some cases it's been even harder to figure out what the right interface to the technology is. How do we design the configuration? How do we design the tool? How do we guide engineers in using the tool to just try to make sure that they're going to be able to use this to the best extent possible? And I think by all the effort that we've put into that, we've created, again, the best developer experience of any continuous integration tool in the market.
All right. So is this an industry where adoption is fairly, people just adopt new products, right? So one of the things I have as an issue in healthcare, I already have too many systems. I don't care if this is going to fix all my problems. Don't give me another system. How are you thinking about integration and adoption with a new tool?
Yeah, that is a challenge for us too. Maybe not the number of systems. We're not going to have time to cover it on this podcast, but that's actually what I felt with a couple of products that we had built and shipped before Mint, is that there was just kind of this fatigue of the number of tools and the number of SaaS licenses and per seat licenses and software that teams were buying to do various things. And I felt that a lot, and that's part of the reason that we actually kind of pivoted towards building Mint. We've always been solving problems in this same space, but we actually didn't start building Mint when we first started the company. But the great thing about continuous integration tools is that, as I shared earlier, every engineering team needs one. The bad thing is, I think, as your question alluded to here, is they also all already have one, for the most part. So we're in the business of getting teams to switch. But engineering teams encounter a lot of pain points in this. And as I shared, it's a really important part of their process. So we've certainly talked to some engineering teams who are welcome to have a new solution. That's not going to be the case everywhere. I think we're going to find, that a lot of people are going to look at it and say, oh, this sounds great. It looks really awesome, but it's just not going to be a priority for us to switch right now. But if we were starting from scratch, this is what we would choose. And that's all right with us. Over time, teams start new projects, new companies form, new startups need new tools. And I think there's ample opportunity to be a new entrant into this space and, slowly build up a great set of customers over time.
Yeah. So it sounds like very much when you're dealing with developers, you wouldn't think design matters. But it sounds very much like that's one of the things that you're finding is how do we make this thing look and feel like something you want to engage with, right? So how are you guys thinking about design? And I know it's great. You're solving the problems, you're producing tests, but how has your thinking changed about design and the importance of it?
Yeah, a big thing for engineers is actually just the defaults and the default behavior, because intent becomes a really complicated thing. A computer can only process the information that it gets, and it always does exactly what it's told to do. But whether or not an engineer meant to do the thing that they, instructed the computer to do is really the tricky part of designing engineering interfaces. So there's a lot that goes into, well, if somebody doesn't specify this, how do we want the system to behave? And then there's a lot that goes into the specification too. What's the most, minimal set of specification that we need to be able to run the commands that we need? And you look at a lot of other platforms and they're very verbose. There's a lot of duplication. Duplication leads to maintenance nightmares where it's hard for engineers to make changes across all the disparate tasks that they're trying to run. And Mint is the only CI platform that uses something that engineers refer to as a DAG, a directed acyclic graph, where normally what happens with these tools, I'll try to explain this in the least engineering way possible, is every single piece of automation that you want to run has to run from scratch. You literally start with these virtual machines, like this ephemeral server that's short-lived, that boots from scratch, and then you install it, you configure it, you customize it, and then you run the thing that you want to run. And you have to duplicate that for every single task that you want to run. Where Mint eliminates that duplication. It allows you to specify a task and specify the dependencies that go into it, and do this in like this really clear, concise way that makes the configuration easy to read. And eliminates all of that duplication, which just is kind of an example is the high-level description works of how we've designed that interface to just make things easier for engineers.
Yeah, I like it. And so it sounds very much like you're building the product you wish you had all those years while you were building companies. But one of the things that you guys are working through is, are you going to be an early stage company helping early stage companies, or are you going to be a mid-stage companies trying to convince them to switch? And so where do you think your entry point actually is? Where is your focus right now, given the feedback from your customers?
We're starting small. We're starting at the bottom of the market and working our way up. I mean, interestingly, engineering teams sometimes don't have the types of problems that we can solve until they grow to be a little bit larger, like probably at least 10 engineers. But I think once you start hitting that 10 plus range, you start to slowly encounter the types of problems that we're solving. And this is very much the tool that I wish I would have had in past lives. So, we're starting small. We're starting out helping the smallest engineering teams, that we engage with, and like working our way up in the market. I think engaging with big enterprises as an early stage startup can be like a pretty difficult proposition. So we'll work our way up there, but we'll take our time with it. And one of the most fun and rewarding parts of building Mint, though, is that we can dog food it. It's a term that engineers use for using a product themselves. I guess product people and other people in startups do too. But we actually use Mint to build Mint. So it's actually pretty wild. But every time we make a code change to Mint, the previous version of Mint runs all that automation, and then it releases the next version of Mint. And then we use that version to build the next one. So Mint is built on Mint, which means we are just intimately aware of all the pain points, of the opportunities to make the experience better through our own usage. Of course, we put great care into getting feedback from a lot of our early customers, and I'm really thankful for a lot of the beta testers we had, because sometimes they did have different usage patterns than what we had on our own. But the fact that we used Mint just day in and day out to build it itself has, I think, helped us build a much better product.
Okay, awesome. So for something like this, is there like a cool demo? Like, can I put some like sample code out there, or do I need to buy it first? What's the deal? How do you get me hooked, man? How do you get me addicted to this thing? So I need to use it. I got to have it. So therefore I buy it.
Yeah, you can definitely try it for free. We provide everybody with like free credits that they can use to experiment with Mint on their own. And for companies that are interested in switching and have bigger workflows, we're happy to partner with them and figure out the right way to have our engineers help with that migration, and also give them additional free credits so they can really do a side-by-side comparison with their existing tooling. But we found that once engineers do that comparison, Mint wins hands down, and it's the dev experience that people want to have for CI.
Hey there, 614 Startups community. We're thrilled to share some exciting news with you. This podcast is proudly supported by Loop, the game changers in return management. Not only are they revolutionizing e-commerce, but they're also on the lookout for talented individuals to join their dynamic team. Looking to be part of a company that values innovation and fosters a vibrant culture? Well, Loop is the place to be. Check out their open positions at loopreturns.com/careers. And here's the scoop. Loop has been recognized by Forbes as one of the next billion-dollar startups of 2023. Want to be part of a success story? Now's your chance. Don't miss out on this incredible opportunity. Head over to loopreturns.com/careers and be part of something extraordinary. Loop, where innovation meets success. Apply now. This episode is brought to you by KJK. Tired of the billable hour? KJK has a solution. The KJK GC Advantage program offers businesses comprehensive legal services in the areas of employment, corporate services, real estate, trademark, intellectual property, and estate planning, all for a set monthly fee. KJK serves as their clients' partners in business, not just their lawyers. Along with cost certainty and predictability, the KJK GC Advantage program gives clients peace of mind, knowing their projects will be handled quickly and efficiently, maximizing the return on investment on their legal spend. So don't go it alone. Let KJK help. Learn more by visiting kjk.com.
All right, there you go, guys. If you were listening to this podcast thinking, dang, I got to buy this thing to try it, you don't have to buy it, man. You heard it from the CEO himself. All right, so let's pivot a little bit to the business side. Now we know what the product does. We know who it serves, and people out there can try it and, you know, reach out to you and figure that out. So is there kind of like a link on the website for a free demo? So if they go to, what's your website?
Yeah. All right. It's RWX.com.
All right. Right now, pause the podcast, go to RWX.com and request a demo. All right. And Dan is going to be proven right that it's the best tool for you to use if you're an engineer. All right. So you're an experienced founder at this point. We hear all the time that investors love that experience, right? If you've done it once, it's a little bit less risky. But for you as an experienced founder, does it get any easier, right, on startup number 2? What has been your experience on startup number 2 so far?
It's still exceptionally difficult. I think you see this all the time. You know, repeat founders sometimes will have a great success, but not always, because I think it's just the nature of trying to build something new from scratch that there are always challenges along the way. And, you know, it's not a gimme. I mean, it's not a gimme based on your team, based on, you know, the type of product, based on the amount of funding that you have. You see extraordinarily well-funded startups not make it all the time. So it's really difficult to build something from scratch. And, you know, there's always a lot of technical risk, and maybe sometimes even not knowing if you're going to be able to build the technology and do the things you want to do. And, you know, there's certain compromises and changes we had to make along the way of building Mint based on what we learned as we tried to create that technology. And you have the entire like go-to-market phase of finding product market fit and getting early stage customers. And don't get me wrong, being a repeat founder provides a lot of advantages. It's a privileged position to be in because a lot of investors, you know, recognize past success and, you know, look at it as a predictor of likelihood of future success. And, you know, you also have a network, and you've invested the time and have the experience of having built something before that you can leverage. But circumstances are different. I think it's what makes advice always hard to take into consideration, is just the unique set of circumstances that every single company is dealing with. And, you know, I find that that's pretty much universally true, regardless of what startup number you're currently building.
Yeah, it doesn't get any easier. It's like being a parent. Just because you had one kid and you did well, second kid is going to be different, right? You're going to be at a different stage.
Full surprises.
Absolutely full of surprises. You could never, you know, stamp yourself as, you know, the best parent in the world. Every kid represents a new challenge. All right. But you were successful in raising some capital. And, you know, in Columbus, it's a conversation that comes up all the time. Where's the money? Where's the money? Where's the money? But you and your co-founding team were able to raise $7 million back in 2022, but you didn't say anything about it until just a few months ago. Why'd you make that decision?
Yeah, we really wanted to wait until we built something that people could use. You know, there's a lot of reasons that companies choose to make fundraising announcements. A lot of times in the early stages, it's for trying to generate some early awareness of what they're building and helping out with recruiting. You know, I was fortunate to know some of the best engineers I've ever worked with, and be able to, you know, have them join on this journey and work alongside them in building this. So I didn't really feel like I needed to for a recruiting reason. And when we first started the company, we were doing a lot of research and development and connecting with people, trying to decide exactly the best way to solve some of the problems that we wanted to solve. So, you know, we didn't have this product where we were trying to generate all this hype ahead of releasing it. You know, we were being, I think, a bit more methodical with what we were building. So we just felt like when we first raised that capital, there wasn't really reason to make a lot of fanfare about it, even though we were, you know, proud to have had an investor back us, and, you know, excited to have the financial resources that we needed to really, as I described earlier, it took a long time to, you know, be able to build this technology. It's just a really hard problem to solve. But as we reached the point where we had built something that we were excited to share, and that we were wanting to start to talk more about what we had built and the way we approach these problems, we thought it was the right time then to kind of share some of that fundraising news as we went to market with Mint.
All right. So, you know, you got some folks out here pulling their hair out. He's like, you mean you raised money before you had something built? What do you mean? All right. So, guys, calm down. You'll get there hopefully one day. Okay. Don't take it out on Dan. So, but Dan, this is a valuable time to help people understand maybe some tips. I wouldn't necessarily call it some tricks, but just some advice for founders out there who are frustrated, who are
Yeah.
they feel like they have something built and they're maybe early users on it and they want to raise capital. What some advice do you have for folks out there who are struggling a little bit?
Really just focus on the problem and focus on your customers. And I can share, that's how our investor evaluated the opportunity. Like, despite my resume and my background, and I know this because after they invested, they shared it with me. They took the product that we were building and the thesis for it, because as you had just acknowledged, we raised the capital before we had the product, and they went and did market research. They went to engineering leaders and said, like, hey, there's a startup that wants to solve these problems. Are these actual problems? Would you pay for a solution to these problems? And based on that market research that they had interviewing engineering leaders about the problems that we were solving and the solutions that we were proposing, they felt like it was a compelling opportunity. They felt like, okay, this problem does exist and companies will be willing to pay money for a solution to this problem. And this seems like the right team to go and build a solution to this problem. And that's what led a lot of their investment. So don't get me wrong, I'm sure the background and experience of our founding team did help considerably. I'm not saying that, even if you run through that process, that every person's going to just be able to go out and easily raise capital. I know it's extraordinarily difficult. And, I empathize with the founders who, really just are passionate about building something and are trying to find the financial backing to be able to go and do it. But really think about things through that lens. Think about what you're building. Get the testimonials, ahead of creating a product, and build a compelling investment thesis that, hey, this is a real problem. Here are people who acknowledge that it's a problem, and here are people who are willing to pay for a solution to this problem. And I think you'll find a lot of investors will be excited about opportunities if you can present them that way.
Yeah. And so is it fair to assume that you're an investor too now?
I did put some of the capital into the company myself, given the outcome that I was fortunate to be able to have in past startup experiences. Because I truly believe in what we're doing, and it felt like a great place to put capital into this opportunity. So the entire $7 million was not from external investors, but we were fortunate to have some investors that we felt like could really increase our odds of success through the expertise that they had and through the broad purview into these markets that they had. And we decided to take some additional outside capital as well.
Okay, wonderful. Now, I meant that. Okay, so yes, but a skin in the game. Also,
oh, you meant in other startups.
Hang on, that's a tip right there. Have some skin in the game, right? If you're not willing to invest your own money in the company, why should investors invest their money in the company, right? That's another thing that kind of brings investors along as well. But you're out there, I'm assuming, maybe looking at deals yourself for other startups. So have you started to do some angel investing, anything like that?
I only do a little bit.
Okay.
I've mostly done it for people I know that I have past working relationships with who I've been excited to support. I'm most excited to do it if I feel like I can also be valuable and helpful in helping them build their company. But otherwise, it takes time to evaluate opportunities. I love the idea of supporting teams, and I know capital can be helpful for that. But I guess I decided to allocate the majority of my investment capital and my time on building RWX instead. And we'll see in the future. Maybe I'll do some more of it.
Okay. Besides the flood of demo requests that you're going to get as a result of this podcast, what's next for you in RWX?
We have a list a mile long of ideas for Mint and ways that we can make it better. We've gotten it to an exceptionally good spot right now, but we're excited to keep going down that journey. We've been getting great feedback from the customers that we have so far, identifying opportunities and ways to make it even better. And we just want to have a big impact for engineering teams. And software engineering has this extraordinary capability to create new products, provide new services and experiences for consumers in so many different facets of their life. And I think if we can make the software engineering experience better, hopefully that leads to a second order effect of improving a whole host of different things for consumers through the technology that companies will create. And we'd love to play a small part in doing that.
Yeah, well, Dan, it's been a pleasure. Long time coming. I'm glad to have you on. Hopefully you can come back on. We can have a conversation about whatever else you want to talk about. You always have an invitation whenever you choose to exercise it. So I want to leave the folks with my one takeaway today from our conversation is that you got to have skin in the game, folks. All right. If you expect somebody to invest in you, you must also be willing to invest in yourself. And don't give me that crap about, well, I don't have any money. You got to go out there and get it if you believe enough in the solution that you're building. All right, folks. This has been another episode of the 614 Startups podcast. Thanks to Dan, my very special guest, and thanks to you, the listener, for you are the reason why we could do what we're doing. Until next time, peace.
That's a wrap, folks. You can find this and all our episodes on our website, 614startups.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Anchor, and all your favorite podcasting platforms. Don't forget to subscribe and write a review. If you'd like updates sent directly to your inbox, you can sign up for our weekly newsletter on the website. To engage in the 614 Startups community, follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at 614 Startups on all platforms, and join the conversation. For sponsorship opportunities and collaborations, email us at info@614startups.com.